Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending tonight. I'm Jeff. Thank you for joining us. Left Bank Books tonight welcomes debut short story author Chelsea T. Hicks, who will discuss the short story collection that fearlessly embraces and upends Native American tradition and storytelling, A Calm and Normal Heart. Hicks will be in conversation with Morgan Talty, the author of Night of the Living Rez. Left Bank Books is St. Louis's oldest independent bookstore. We would like to thank all our supporters, the supporters of Chelsea and Morgan, and everyone for their outpouring of love to our bookstore. Left Bank Books offers in-store shopping, curbside pickup, and delivery to anywhere in the world. We're happy to be able to bring our event series virtual because we believe events are a way to expand your mind and bring in new thoughts to make the world a better place. We hope you enjoyed tonight's event, and we hope you support Left Bank Books by purchasing a copy or multiple copies for friends and family, perhaps tonight at our website on left-bank.com. Thank you for your support. We produce hundreds of author events each year with our team here in St. Louis, which we couldn't do without you. Please include questions in the comments section below for the Q&A at the end of this session. Be sure to follow Left Bank Books on Facebook and YouTube to keep notified of all our fantastic virtual events. Now, for A Calm and Normal Heart. According to Louise Erdrich, Chelsea T. Hicks' deadpan, dexterous wit can make you laugh and cry in the space of a heartbeat. A Calm and Normal Heart is the book I've been waiting for, she writes. Audacious, tender, and fiercely committed. Chelsea T. Hicks' writing has been published in the LA Review of Books, the Paris Review, McSweeney's, The Believer, the Audacity, Yellow Medicine Review, Indian Country Today, and elsewhere. She is an incoming Tulsa Artist Fellow and a recent graduate from the MFA program in creative writing at the Institute of American Indian Arts. She's a 2016 Wah-Zha-Zhi Woman Artist featured by the Osage Nation Museum, a 2016 and 2017 Writing by Writers Fellow, and a 2020 finalist for the Eliza So Fellowship for Native American women writers. She is an enrolled citizen of the Osage Nation, and she belongs to the Pawhuska District. Morgan Talty is a citizen of the Penobscot Indian Nation where he grew up. Named one of Narrative's 30 Below 30, Talty's work has appeared in the Georgia Review, Shenandoah, TriQuarterly, Narrative Magazine, LitHub, and elsewhere. He lives in Levant, Maine. And now I would like to welcome our guests for the evening, Chelsea T. Hicks and Morgan Talty. Wherever you are, please give them a hearty round of applause. And here they are.
Thank you, Jeff.
It's such an honor to be here and to work with Left Bank Books and to be in conversation with such an incredible author as Morgan. Morgan, thank you so much for being in the conversation.
I mean, I'm super delighted to be here and to be talking with you about, this remarkable story collection, A Calm and Normal Heart.
Jeff, can you hear Morgan? Maybe I should grab
I can hear you. I think
my headphones.
You grab your headphones. I'll keep talking.
You're not muted. Okay, hold on. Let me go grab the headphones.
All right, I'll keep people occupied. So there's two things I want to say. One, I need to update my bio so it does not say named one of Narrative's 30 Below 30, or it says that, but it should say named one of Narrative's 30 Below 30. He is now 31 because I never fit in that category now. And the other thing for all of you who are here tonight, I'm really, really excited to talk with Chelsea about this book, especially, talking about it in the context of indigeneity. I feel like I haven't actually been in a conversation like this with another author.
Okay.
Or you've got him? Can you hear me? It says you're muted.
Hello, sorry about that. I hope she rejoins. It might work better. Let's see. Well, from what I understand, you also have a book that's about to come out, Morgan. You want to talk about that for a second?
Sure. Yeah. I have a book coming out July 5th, so very, very soon, next Tuesday, called Night of the Living Res, and it's set on the Penobscot Nation, and it's like Chelsea's book. It's a book of stories. It's 12 stories all told through the perspective of David, and you can find out more about him on Tuesday because Chelsea is back. How's your audio?
I think it's good.
There we go. Okay. While you were gone, I was rambling and holding down the fort. But one thing I was saying is I feel like I feel like it's been forever since like I've had or been in an exclusive conversation with another Indigenous writer about Indigenous literature and about indigeneity. I feel like because we've all been in Zoom world for so long now that I've been doing events and facilitating conversations with other writers, but they haven't been native writers, and so this is like I'm like really, really excited to like talk about all this stuff. And before we dive into the story collection, I thought maybe we could just talk for a minute about what our experiences have been like, living on ancestral land where most of it is occupied by settlers, and maybe what we think homeland means, and how do we reconcile this stolen land, this stolen yet shared space, right, between a number of different people.
Yeah, those are really good questions, and something I've been thinking about living here in Tulsa on ancestral land. Tulsa is Wah-Zha-Zhi land as well as Caddo and Kickapoo, and it's weird because you can't, like, our people in terms of our homelands today are on the res about an hour northeast, and on the Osage Nation, like I didn't grow up there, and I had a conversation with a cousin recently who was traveling to go to different Wah-Zha-Zhi sacred spaces, mainly in Missouri. We were talking about, I myself have been to Missouri and stayed on ancestral Osage land there, and there's a heaviness to being on that land and there not being any of our people there, and it can feel so isolating, even just like kind of alarming to my nervous system. And at the same time, I feel really strong connection to like just being there, not necessarily like in the towns, but for instance, the Gasconade River, one time I was there in Missouri, and it's like, I feel so connected to it, and it's so beautiful to be there. And I feel like I actually kind of had this experience where certain, like a despair response or something that I didn't really know what it was in myself, but I would experience it different times in my life. I had this experience of like just this sense of ancestors kind of comforting me. And I felt like that kind of went away since I spent time there. But at the same time, I would get so angry sometimes just being around different people where there's no acknowledgement and there's no community of like Osage or Wah-Zha-Zhi people. And so it's really kind of confusing experience. But as for being here in Tulsa, kind of near the res, I feel every day, like I have these feelings of like, wow, I'm in the right place. I feel like I'm in the right place. So it's a really complicated kind of question. And I'm wondering, what about for you in terms of?
Yeah, mine, I think Chelsea froze, or did I freeze? Oh, no. Okay, you're there.
We're back.
We're back. Yeah, I mean, mine's kind of like the opposite of yours. I grew up on the Penobscot Reservation, which is not very big. It's like a 3 by 2 mile island that sits in the Penobscot River. And there's just a bridge on and off, just one bridge. And, I grew up there. I was born in Bridgeport, Connecticut, and I moved to the reservation with my mom when I was 6, and I grew up there. It's always been like my home. That's what I say. And it's interesting, as I was like just thinking about this, is like I live in Levant, Maine, which is like about 35 minutes away from the reservation now. And someone asked me, oh, do you go to the reservation often? And I'm like, yeah, I do. I was just there today, but it got me thinking about kind of like, like the reservation's there, but also all of this land, was, held by Penobscot, Passamaquoddy, Micmac, Maliseet, and, the Wabanaki Confederacy in this area. So it's almost like, well, I feel like that's the place, right? Like that's the place where we belong, in a sense. It's also like a lie that there's also all this land and earth that's under us that's also sort of our space or our home, right? It's just been sort of taken from us. And so I've started to like really rethink this whole idea of like, oh, do you like still have connections to the res? And it's like, well, yeah, this land connects to that land. It goes right over there. And the other thing too is fortunately for, the Wabanaki Confederacy, we didn't have a lot of forced removal. We didn't have extensive forced removal. So it's so hard to, I think reading this book, was one of the ways that really, I think, helped me understand a deeper sense of displacement, right? For those who may not have that perspective. And, it was never at the forefront, but it was there, right? Sort of like pulsing in this book. And, I wonder, you have so many characters that are living in this sort of like diaspora, right? That they're away from their tribal land bases, for a myriad of reasons, whether it's the, Relocation Act of 1956 or the Reign of Terror, the Osage murders, having to do with oil. You have a character, Mina from Brother, who's living on the Osage reservation. Then you have, another character who's not living there. I'm just super curious. And I feel like maybe this goes back to how you ended your last comment with, it's sort of like a complicated question. This might be another one, but I'm curious, what were you hoping to investigate in using this diaspora with your characters?
Yeah. So I know that, since the Osage people, we're not, we were removed first to Kansas and then to Oklahoma. And one of my friends, Ryan Redcorn, he'll say, well, if we're not based on a land base anymore, then we're based on being a people, and that we're a people. And the most of those people are in Osage County today. And I can't really fully investigate the question of like, how does it affect us to have been removed from Missouri and Kansas to Osage County? But the other part of the question that I felt I could kind of investigate is, what does it mean for a lot of our people to be in these other places that aren't in Osage County? And we have 25,000 enrolled Osage people, but most of them don't live within the borders of the nation. And a lot of them live concentrated in California as well as Texas. And myself, growing up in Southern Virginia and then moving to California for school, I got to know the California Osage groups, and I was kind of delighted. I thought it was wild that I got this mailer in the mail, like, why don't you come to this Northern California Osage group? And I was like, what? And so I dressed myself up as I would, trying to like make a good impression in what I would think of as like, the Oklahoma community, which at the time I was wearing like penny loafers and like a striped shirt tucked in with like a nickel belt. And I was just trying to look like upstanding or something like that, like dressed politely, like a nice woman. And when I went there, people were not how I knew of Osages in Oklahoma. They were like, just tatted up and like looked cool, like very urban. And I was just like, whoa. And so it was really exciting for me because growing up, I felt so isolated. And like there were a couple Native kids in school, like and my dad would work on the Rappahannock Reservation in Virginia. So I was around tribal kids, and he would introduce me. They had a woman chief. So it wasn't so much a problem with my identity that I like didn't feel Native. I just felt lacking community really badly. And yeah, so it is a complicated question. Like the other part of it that I want to investigate that, I mean, it's just at this point, I don't know if I'm super great at articulating it, but it's that like people, when a person goes away from their community, what still constitutes their indigeneity? If indigeneity is like land-based, culture-based, and language-based, and we don't have our language, we're not on our original land. Yes, we still have a land base, so that's good. And then what if a person doesn't know their culture? And if you're not on your tribe's land base now, you don't have your language and you don't have your culture, like, is your indigeneity in question? And I know that, I mean, that's not necessarily how it's thought of. Like if you're enrolled, it's your nation's sovereign choice. But at least in terms of like the disconnection, like I just thought we need to have more conversations around that. And I wanted to write about it because it was part of my experience and what I had seen.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad you wrote about it. I'm glad those questions, like produce this type of work. And, when you were saying that, when you were just talking about, lacking that sense of community, it really got me thinking about the passage you're going to read later on, about how do we mark ourselves as Indigenous when we're not in our community. And, like I had said, I was born in Bridgeport, Connecticut, and my mom moved with me to the Penobscot Nation. I used to spend my summers in Connecticut and on this dead end road with him and a family, nobody there was Native. And it was great. I loved it, but there was always that feel like when I took the bus to come back home to Maine, there was always that excitement that I was getting, as I got closer and closer and closer to the reservation, being able to see friends, knowing that, at the end of August, there's going to be the big social, there's going to be all of these like events going on. And, I think you're right. It's like I don't even think, like, how do we exert outwardly, our sense of indigeneity, but how do we retain the feeling that we are? Because I often felt like it went away when I left. Like the reservation and its boundaries and the waters that go around it were like the thing that defined me, which isn't true, right? And it's just sort of this like colonial illusion or mirage that's been established through all of its, terrible, its terrible history and relationships with tribes. And yeah, I feel like I could talk on and on about this. And I mean, in a way, we are still continuing this conversation of diasporas, right? And trying to retain a sense of community outwardly and inwardly. And, this sense of connection, right? This connection to place. And, since you engage ideas of ancestral land and tribal diasporas, I was wondering if you wanted to share some of your thoughts on ancestral land connection and the land back movement, and maybe explain it a little bit for those who are unfamiliar.
Yeah, so I started seeing the land back kind of like hashtag and native clothing and like as a kind of like activist phrase. And I know that they've talked about it in Reservation Dogs. Like there's this TV show on Hulu made by Sterling Harjo, who's Creek. And in it, there's this older couple and they're driving along the road, and this older couple, and the man says, what do you think they mean by land back? And the woman says, well, I guess they want the land back. And he says, well, what do you mean, all of it? And she's like, well, yeah. And so the idea is some people, like some settler people, are wanting to make reparations or try to heal their lineages, and recognizing that some of the atrocities done during colonial history in the United States can be made right through returning land. And that's one way of approaching, the idea of like ethics and trying to create a more just society in the United States. So sometimes people make actual offers to tribes. Would you like this land back? And so I have had some experiences where that's been said to me, and I've been learning about what that would mean. And one of the things that comes after you say this idea of like, oh yeah, let's ask for the land back or let's give the land back is what are the terms, so to speak, you know, like what are the terms? What is already there on that land? How will it be managed? What's the transition? And there's so much conversation around that. And ancestral land in particular and land connection for, I think, not just Indigenous people, but for just any people comes with the idea of rematriation, which is another way of saying it is like coming home, which is the same deal in terms of when we say diaspora, it means going back somewhere. And so like I've been inspired a lot by this idea of rematriation and coming home. And it's basically about the idea that you can look at what your ancestors believed, particularly matrilineal, because patriarchal structure of society causes us to lose a lot of things that came through our mothers. And so it's about coming back into some balance. And so with matrilineal lines, like what was the land that our mothers were on, and kind of what do we stand to learn from talking to water, talking to land, listening to wind. And I thought those ideas sounded super crazy, and that it was just me who's like, oh yeah, I'm like got a message from the wind, and like that's really like hippie or just like woo woo, and I didn't like it. But I was talking to this Tulsa Artist Fellow recently, and we were talking about the wind, and we had this joke going on between us about like, tell me if the wind told you something, because the wind, you know, gets all around, like waters do too, and earth tends to stay more where it is, but like wind might be able to be more in diaspora. And so we were joking about like that, and she was like, oh no, it's really normal, people talk to the water now, it's a thing, they've been doing science experiments on it, that if you talk to water like kindly or rudely, or the molecules respond really differently. And so I was like, okay, because I don't like the idea of like Native people being too stereotypically like talking to water and talking to wind. But at the same time, like I do think that with ancestral veneration, learning about our ancestors, both things they did that we might need to make right, as well as things they did that could be like healing practices for us, and then traveling to ancestral water and land can be really, really healing, like it was for me. So the whole land back thing is a conversation, and I think that it doesn't necessarily need to be an argument or a really highly politicized, like charged thing. It can just be a learning experience about what are we going to do with where we are at now.
Yeah, and that is especially true with land that's, you know, for other tribes, like is being contested, right? Like the whole time you were talking, I started to think about the Black Hills, right? The Black Hills, you know, it was found that, you know, that the tribe was, that the Black Hills were worth so much money, but the tribe will not take the Black Hills back. They want the land instead of this transmutation of cash, which is like over $1 billion, right? You know, land is, you know, a lot, you know, in this sort of Western structure, you know, land has become synonymous with money, and that as a philosophy was never really one that was shared with, you know, at least in Penobscot culture, and I imagine in yours as well. I don't mean to generalize, but I don't think any tribe is really associated with land with this like tenure type value. There is this different philosophical approach to it, which is like even very embedded in the languages that we speak. You know, the way the words work, the way we are identified by certain, you know, prefixes and suffixes in language itself. But yeah, so I mean, if people want to give me land back in Maine, I would take that land and keep it. But it is, I would suggest folks to definitely look into the movement and think about it and consider where it is you live too, right? Like you may not even know that where you're living right now is actually, you know, a homeland for, you know, displaced people. So yeah. And, you know, continuing with this idea of displacement, of connection, of land. I want to try to move a little bit closer to the book. I'm really curious to hear your thoughts on how you think writing and reading, can help us native and non-native reconnect with land, our ancestors, and even the very language that was stripped by us from colonists. I suppose this is also a question that has to do with how can literature bring us all closer together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that one of the reasons I wanted to include Wah-Zha-Zhi need to wait for me. Yeah, Wah-Zha-Zhi. They translated as like Osage, Wah-Zha-Zhi, Osage, and then it became Osage. So when you say Wah-Zha-Zhi it means Wah-Zha-Zhi, Osage, talk. So Osage language. I wanted to include it in this book, even though I think it's a little sensitive because we've lost so much of our language and we're working to rebuild it. And not everybody, has the time or ability to dedicate a large part of their life to relearning it. And, I didn't want to create shame by writing something that our own people couldn't read. And then again, who am I to do that when I am not even fluent in the language? But I work with our 578s, which are these 578 phrases that one of my teachers, Dr. Herman Mowgre Lookout, gathered with a team of others from fluent speakers. And I tried to include the language a lot in the book because I've worked in multilingual curriculums and second language acquisition. And one of the ways to speed up language acquisition is to do leisure activities in the language. So I thought that if I could include Wah-Zha-Zhi in the book and not translate it, then that would be at least a step toward literature in Wah-Zha-Zhi for leisure activities for Osage people. And so I think that in terms of connecting with others who aren't Osage, I was kind of hoping that, as you're reading this book and you come to those sections in Wah-Zha-Zhi that you might kind of wonder okay, yeah, I can guess what this kind of saying from the context, but what about me as a reader, what languages do maybe everyone else stand to inherit? What are some languages you might have lost? And I remember reading N. Scott Momaday talking about Beowulf in this way, that when he reads Seamus Heaney translation of Beowulf and looks at the old language, he's like, yes, and in my heart, I felt nostalgic that I was around that fire. And so I do mean everybody, And so I think that reading and writing can bring us closer through, when we listen to what each other has to say, it creates more connection. And I hope that, I honestly think that when we read, at least for me, it makes me want to write. And I didn't grow up wanting to be a writer. I just loved reading. And eventually I just started trying to do it because there was so much of that understanding of what it is in my head. So I think that reading could make us all connected more through making us want to write and then therefore communicate more. It's my answer is trying to philosophize too much.
Yeah, I know. There's so much there. It's interesting though. It's because I mean, in my book too, I use the Penobscot language, and
yeah.
I chose not to use the alphabetic. There's the book right there, Chelsea.
Night of the Living Rez out next week.
Yeah, July 5th. Thank you. I use the Penobscot language in the book, here and there, and use some phrases, and I chose to do it phonetically as opposed to using the alphabetic system that had been created for this traditionally historic or traditionally oral language. And when it came time to when the book was getting ready to go to on submission, I was struck with this question, do I change all of these from phonetic to actual spellings, or do I keep it phonetically?
Yeah.
And, I think, I chose ultimately to do phonetics because I think that's how I wrote. Like, that's how I understood and knew the language in my limited capacity. I had learned, in middle school, a long time ago, like how things were spelled, right? But I don't remember it, and you forget. And I feel like in a way, like it became like an actual marker, like an historical marker of like, this is how, this person, me, knows this language at this time. And like I began to now like really actually use the appropriate spellings, like in essays I publish and stuff like that, or other pieces. I don't know why. I just feel like it looks so sharp on the page as like
It looks
juxtaposed.
keen.
Yeah, with like, because we have these like a K and then there's like a little W next to it, and it's like you don't see that everywhere.
Right.
And so I'm like, I'm gonna throw that in there just because it's cool and I want to leave that footprint, and I want to keep doing it. But I think what I was getting at was, I feel like writing, and I've been thinking about this for like the past 2 days, has like, I feel like writing has also allowed me to remember things that I've forgotten. Like we're talking about, lost language. And, I remember when I was writing, and I'm curious to know if this was an experience you had at all, but, or what your relationship is or was with the language growing up. But, when I was writing my book, I was like, oh, this feels like a natural place where a character would say something in Penobscot. And I would, put something in, and then like later I'd go back and I'm like, wait, is that actually a Penobscot phrase, or did I just like make that up? And I would, because I didn't have, so I like, there's this one example where the narrator's sister tells her brother to come in, and she's like, BD gay, which means to come in. And I was like, did I make that up? I'm like, am I going to embarrass myself when this book comes out? And like, the people who teach Penobscot and are like cultural bearers look at this, they're like, what is this nutcase doing? But like,
you were right.
yeah, I reached out and they're like, oh, this is how you say it. And I was like, I don't remember where I heard it. I don't know, like who said it. It's just crazy. But that's happened to me several times when writing, where like a word or a phrase would like emerge out of nowhere. And I'm just curious if that happened to you at all when you were writing this book.
Wow, that's so interesting, Morgan. Yes, but I didn't grow up like hearing a lot of language. Like my Eco would say like Fiji, and she would like rub the back of her hand, and we called her Eco. But besides that, I feel like that was the other time I heard language was attending our Elonchka ceremonial dances, and people would speak in Wah-Zha-Zhi. But like, I think some families growing up, like there's this Osage Nation podcast, Wah-Zha-Zhi podcast. And if people are curious, you could listen to that. And some of our Osage people describe like their experiences hearing the language in their homes growing up, and kind of how much and what it's like. But for me, I didn't hear too much. It was really little what I did. So when I started learning the language, which was probably it was in 2015 that I started learning it. So that's 7 years ago. And I'm just like that with language, though. Like I'll try to say something, same as you're talking. Like when I'm writing quickly, and I'll just put something in. I'm like, and I have to go back and check everything over and over again. But so I'm like that with language. But with remembering things in general while writing, yes, like I have noticed that. And also sometimes in writing essays, like in writing nonfiction and thinking about childhood, I will remember things while writing that I had forgotten. And so I do think that writing has the capacity to help us remember. And there's even this prompt that I really like from N. Scott Momaday. Sorry. And he's like, what is it that you remember? Not even necessarily from your lifetime or explicably that you know, but just things that you dreamed, or that when you say to yourself, what do I remember? You can just write and you remember certain things. And it's basically coming from like I guess some people call it blood memory or ancestral memory. And so that happened too. in the last story in the collection. And like, I didn't even know where that came from. And I was just like, look, this isn't an official Osage story. This isn't even a Osage inspired story. This is just something that I remembered. Like, so I think that writing definitely can help us remember. I have to super agree with you.
Yeah. I think it can help us remember, and it can also just sort of direct us in a future way. Like, I know, like, I would write with, not creation stories, but like tell some of the myths from our tribe in my stories, and I would extend them past their like original, usage. And it's fun to spin them that way, and to develop them. So I feel like, I was wondering, it's interesting because we're here and we're talking about these concepts, these ideas, and I wonder if I feel like there's this pressure in mainstream culture to sort of for marginalized voices to do more than a specific genre demands, or what readers demand from a genre. Like, for example, Native fiction often has to explain more than regular fiction might have to. We think about language, for example, right? There's been instances where an editor has been said to me, oh, can you just explain what this is? Just put like a dash or something. And it's like, no, I don't want to. But, and there's so many moments, I think, like in your book, where you draw attention to this idea of explanation and the annoyance it can bring, and this idea of performance. And I was wondering if you wanted to talk just a bit about your approach as a writer to, what I think is something you consciously thought about here.
Yeah, I know that people don't, in general, I've heard through writing workshops and just through my experiences talking with people that I think sometimes people's eyes glaze over, they kind of disengage when you start like explaining or teaching them something. So generally I try to skip it if I can and make whatever I'm trying to say inferable. But for Native people, like, there's so much that doesn't translate into, I guess, contemporary culture. Like, there's an essay on this that I like by Sterling Holy White Mountain. It's called something, actually I can't remember the title, but it's about the idea of like brain drain for Natives. And that was on the Atlantic, if people want to look it up. But I just don't, I kind of refuse to explain in this book because I was just kind of like, Native people shouldn't be the ones considered to be like weird and different and inexplicable. Like, this is our ancestral homeland. This is the place from which we've come. And like, other people maybe could stand to like try to figure it out a little bit. And like, that's going to be okay. And so I resisted explaining pretty hard. And I always have. Like, I think we should be able to center ourselves in our own literature. I remember this workshop when I was in college and undergrad at UVA, and I had written something, and just like a little reflection memory exercise, informal, about being at the dances in the summer. And I was just talking about this piece of ribbon work my eco had given me. And I just remember somebody in the class was like, ribbon work isn't a word. And I was just like, it was so funny because, I was meant to be shamed, but it was just like the person was wrong and they were ignorant. And I couldn't even bring myself to correct them because it was just so absurd and hilarious to me. And so I just was like, I'm never going to tell anybody what these things are. It's just like, we know what they are, and that's good enough.
Yeah, I like that. I like that idea that, we know what they are, and that's good enough. And, the work, I feel like collectively, like this collective effort by Indigenous writers is going to create this larger sort of like way that readers can understand not what it means to be Indigenous, because I feel like that's just an impossible task, but I mean, like, what it means to like accept, that you're in this space that has actually been occupied by violence, right? And I think, I feel like this last question, like I said, earlier we had started talking about, how do we present ourselves as Indigenous outwardly, right? How do we, or do we have to do it inwardly? And you had a passage prepared to read, and I feel like now is a great time to hear it.
All right. Yes. Okay. So I'm reading from page 48. Just always seem like a elementary school teacher in the story called By Alcatraz. So this is a story about some college students who are at a Friendsgiving in San Francisco, which is, of course, by Alcatraz. And the main character, Mary, is meeting some of the other people at the Friendsgiving. "Hi," says Mary. She couldn't guess the race of her interlocutor by phenotype, but many tiny braids signal that she's in the category of Black, which makes Mary think that she should be doing something more in the way of presentation to signal that she is Native. But what can she do that isn't totally offensive to herself? If she wore her hair in a left side part with a silk bow, that would be Wah-Zha-Zhi, but no one would know. Or she could be like 1920s Wah-Zha-Zhi people, wanting to be recognizable to Ishtahi. And she stares at her bare feet. She is standing on a, quote, Native-inspired rug, probably from a big box store, not Native designed or made, as she knows the law requires, but appropriated. Another girl interrupts her silence as shyness and intervenes. "Darren, introductions?" She has a somewhat thin face and sits shuffling a deck of cards on an upside-down milk carton. Mary notices her Care Bears shirt and her very long, very curly hair done in 2 excellent, tight, Native-style French braids. Darren speaks. "Sorry, this is my date." "Date?" The girl with rubber band bracelets looks over as she picks up a VHS and removes it from its sleeve. "Date?" Mary repeats. She had thought this was a hangout. "Sorry, Friendsgiving date." Darren apologizes again and points at the Care Bears girl. "This is Darla." Then he points at the bracelets girl, and that's Joy. "So, will you guys want to eat soon?" Mary cannot believe he's pointing right at people. She would never say yes to a date. "Eat maybe in like 30. A third kid with a deep voice says this, and Mary has to step into the room to see him sitting in a bean bag in the far corner. Joy turns from the video machine. "Hey, you want to watch Blade Runner?" Beanbagger grunts. No, they are not initiates. He is the same light brown as Mary's dad in pictures from the 80s. Mary waves at him. "Hi to you too," she says. "I didn't see you before. I'm Mary." "Latif." He nods. Joy says, "So Latif's noting that this is the Broken Persons Club." "Are you a broken person?" "I ask because technically we're a club, and you'd have to be a broken person to watch the movie." Mary thinks of not having parents, but having a grandmother, until recently. Still, she answers, "No?" Joy inserts the VHS and presses buttons on the machine. "So, why aren't you at home?" It's a good question Mary doesn't want to answer. "Nowhere to go at this time," she says. Then she laughs because it sounds like her idea of a business email or a PR lie. "At this time." Miss Braceleted Tiny Braids VHS Joy looks at Mary like she is crazy, then says, "Same." Mary turns to Darren. "I guess I should have asked the same of you, huh?" Before he can answer, a random wave of extreme sleepiness overwhelms her, eyelids closing. Context for you guys, he like put alcohol in her drink, and she doesn't drink. So she starts like, so that's why. A random wave of extreme sleepiness overwhelms her, eyelids closing. Darla jumps up and catches Mary. Thanks, Mary mumbles. As Darla studies her, Mary considers Darla's possible indigeneity. It's a weird thing to suspect in this moment, but they both have those old-fashioned names and the habit of braiding their hair so tight it hurts. So do you want to watch Blade Runner? Darla tries. Her dark brown nose wrinkles as she guides Mary to a bean bag. If you want to watch Blade Runner, just try and share one reason you were, quote, broken. Maybe if she's joining, I should join, Darren suggests, to which all are silent. Mary finds herself averting her eyes in embarrassment, and then Darren leaves quickly, saying he has to tend to the food. Joy relaxes against the armoire holding the TV and draws her legs in close. It would be better if you share how you broke recently, or how you're broken now. Mary nods. She knows they are going to judge her by what she says. And she wants friends who are selective and protective, so she focuses on finding the right words. What I hate most in the whole world right now is that I feel like I live in a different country that's here, inside this one, but no one believes my country exists.
I hope everybody's clapping, because I am. I love that story. I love all of these stories. In that passage you read is like one of my favorite spans of the book. So I feel like we're running. Thank you so much, Chelsea. I want to end with this one quick question. If readers could take one thing away from this book, what would you want it to be?
Oh, yeah. I guess Native people might not be or look like exactly maybe your idea of what they are like, what they look like. And, maybe it's good to kind of open up our idea of what does it mean to be Native? Who is Native?
Thank you, Chelsea.
Yeah, thank you both of you. That was amazing. I've been keeping track of the Q&A. There actually aren't any questions yet, although I had one quickly if you have an extra second. You mentioned like mainstream American culture, and I saw, Chelsea, in the acknowledgments at the back of your book, you mentioned Killers of the Flower Moon. Do you know if Martin Scorsese reached out at all to the Osage Nation? Was that something that he was aware of?
Yes, there was a cultural advisor who's Wah-Zha-Zhi named Addie Roanhorse, and she worked really hard to make sure that details were culturally accurate, as well as the Osage community. As far as I understand, I don't want to misspeak, but I know there were dinners hosted, traditional meals, and I think what I would say is that Osage people gave a lot to make that movie a success, and it's part of the reason why, because like everybody wants their history to be understood and represented accurately, but I don't think that the Osage people and community were all paid. Everyone who contributed or compensated or may have had mixed feelings. Now, there are quite a few Osage people who are cast in the movie, which contains some of our language. So it's a really controversial topic. Some people are grateful for the film and support it, and some people don't think it's appropriate for our stories to be told by non-Osages. And that's just differs according to, who you speak to.
I see. Thank you. Well, it seems like hopefully the culture at large is trying to experience these stories, and it's good that Indigenous people are telling them as well.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Yeah. Thank you so much, Morgan and Jeff. And to everybody out there, if you all have questions, just feel free. Shoot anything. I think we have time. And yeah, like while we're waiting, I just want to talk about Night of the Living Res for a second if we can. Yeah, okay, so like when I was reading these, it's just so close. I think of it as like representing consciousness or what it feels like to be alive, and it's like pretty existential. And reading stuff like that, like I would not consider these stories to necessarily be in that vein. So I think that like you guys should definitely buy both, because it's super different reading feel, like mouth feel, your reading feel. It's really different. But both, like, I mean, I'm being ambitious too, but I think like stylistically I'm trying to, like, let me give this example. In one of the stories, there's like, I try to do something where I use like X's and I's. I like have a graphic. But in Night of the Living Res, I just think that the way the consciousness is written really close, you really go through like every moment of life really closely. And Morgan, that kind of reminds me, like the only writer that like, I don't like it necessarily to compare you to other people. Like, I don't really want to do that because I don't think it's like that. Because there's like an aspect of this that reminds me a little bit of reading Brandon Hobson's fiction, who's absolutely one of my favorite authors because of that, because you get to go slow and feel and experience everything. And like, I didn't write A Calm and Normal Heart like that because I think I was just like, I was kind of angry when I was writing it, and I was wanting to like write in a kind of not a brutal style, but like really direct and basic, because it's just like, it was almost didactic in a way. And like, I tried to take out the parts of it that might feel like that to the reader, because I don't want it to feel like that as a reading experience. But that was kind of the fuel that caused me to write it. But I really, I'd like to one day do something like what you did. It's so amazing. So could you talk a little bit about like your style and like how you think of style and what you wanted to do?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for all of those kind words, and for the Brandon Hobson comparison. That's extremely high praise. Hold on, sorry, getting over a cold. Yeah, I feel like, I don't know, I've always been like with style. I feel like, because I didn't start writing, and I hated reading and I hated writing until I was like 18, and so like by the time I like got in the game, I feel like I was just like limited in so many ways. So I stuck to like, I feel like minimalist type writing. I wouldn't say I'm necessarily a minimalist writer, but I feel like, yeah, minimalist writer. But I feel like I've always just wanted to get very close and try to find like the right details that say something, at that right moment, that do like just more than like one thing. And it can be really hard to find those moments. And I could publish a story, and after it's published, a couple of months later, I'm like, there is that word should have been in there. That would have made everything so much better. And like, I feel like my style is just this like persistence at like trying to find the right word. And it's so hard, and it can be so tiring, but that, and just I feel like just trying to capture those little parts of life, like you said, like it goes moment by moment by moment, and just getting that as correctly as possible, just because it shows character really well, I think.
I because of that, like I will reread this. Like I'm wanting, to get like as soon as it comes out and get my copy and all that. And I'm just like, can't wait to do that. So I'll be reading this rereading while I'm on the planes for the rest of the book tour.
Well, thank you. That makes me happy to hear.
Yeah.
All right. We still haven't gotten any questions, just a lot of thumbs up. So I think people are happy.
All right. Well, we won't pressure them. Yeah. I guess the only other thing, I mean, like, it's Morgan and I did an interview recently. Yeah.
It's like a microphone. We have to talk into it.
Morgan and I did an interview recently on electric literature, and we got to talk about, like, okay, so I'm trying to remember because there's another one that's going to be coming out soon. We got to talk about a little bit about, like, this is in the Instagram culture, like the popular wisdom culture right now about, like, healing, right? And, like, toxic masculinity and, like, women and like all of this that we hear about. I mean, I don't know, maybe that's just my Instagram, but, like, if there's any females out there in the audience, like, I know you know what I'm talking about. And it was really cool to get to talk about that because, like, I think that that's something that we also both deal with in these books. And I love the way, that's the other thing that you write about. I mean, it's like implicit, but dealing with this concept of, like, Native men today, because I was joking to Morgan, like, I want to be able to write about Native men, but, like, I can't really because I'm not a Native man, and it just wouldn't probably be the best idea. But I just want to let you guys know that, like, that's another major theme that is throughout the book, is, like, this idea of healing and, like, how do you heal and what would that look like and what are all the ways that someone can't heal. So yeah, I just feel like that's important for for everybody to know, like, if you're considering buying this book, that will be a big part of it, because these characters are, like, not perfect and they're not Instagram veneer, like, your life is cute. It's very much like cringe, like, what's going on with these people. So now you're fully informed if you're ready to read.
Well, thank you, Chelsea. I will just say that I'm pretty sure most states have made it illegal to purchase one of these books without purchasing the other one. So just be mindful when you go into bookstores or order online that you can get
Arrested.
You can get sentenced.
Yeah, they're fining people up to $8,000.
Yeah, up to $8,000 and 10 years in jail. But in all seriousness, folks, really go buy A Calm and Normal Heart. It's such a phenomenal book. It's just this surprisingly quiet yet explosive meditation on being.
Before we go, can I read the Brandon Hobson quote about the book?
Yes, please. Thanks, Jeff.
All right. Of course. Brendan Hobson writes, "A genuine page turner, full of sentences so beautiful they demand rereading." We have it at Left Bank Books. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Thank you, Chelsea. Thank you, Morgan. Congratulations, and we'll have your book on Tuesday as well. Thank you for everyone for participating.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Chelsea. It was so great to talk with you.
Yes, thanks, Morgan and Jeff, and all of you all who are here. This was a really great pleasure and delight. So take care. I'll be seeing you on your book tour.
Yeah, thank you.
Have a good night.
Good night.
Have a good night, everybody.